The blizzard rolled over the high ridge like a white beast searching for something to swallow. Snow hissed against rock and pine, burying every sound except one, a baby's cry. Talon Rivers pulled his Mustang to a halt, the wind tugging at the long black braid trailing down his back. His breath formed clouds in the frozen air as he tilted his head, listening. The cry came again, thin, sharp, trembling. Not one cry. 3. Talon slid from his saddle, boots sinking deep into the drifted path. The mountains had been his home since childhood. He could read the land like people read letters. And right now the land told him only one thing: someone was dying out here. He gripped the reins loosely and pushed through the trees. The snow was fresh and heavy, no tracks, no sign of life except that desperate sound pulling him forward. As he stepped into a clearing, he saw her, a woman, barely upright, tied to a broken fence post with coils of rusted barbed wire digging into her arms and ribs. Her nightdress hung in tatters. Frost clung to her lashes. Dark bruises bloomed across her skin like someone had smeared ink beneath her bones. At her feet were 3 tiny bundles, newborns, their breaths shallow, too silent. One whimpering weakly. Talon's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He dropped to the snow beside them, the cold biting straight through his shirt as he checked the baby's fingers trembling for the first time in years. They were ice cold, but alive. Only just the woman's lips parted. A whisper escaped, broken and jagged. "Don't let them take my girls." Her voice dissolved into the storm. Talon glanced around the clearing. No footprints, no horses. Whoever had done this wanted her to die unseen. Not today. Not with him here. He spoke gently, though anger burned behind his ribs like smoldering coals. "You're safe now." "I've got you." He drew his hunting blade and sliced the barbed wire. The metal tore her skin, but she didn't scream, not even a tremble. When the last loop snapped free, her body collapsed into his arms, limp as wet cloth. He lifted her easily, holding her against his chest to share his warmth. Next he gathered the newborn girls, tucking the smallest inside his coat, the others wrapped in a wool blanket he secured across his shoulder. The storm roared harder, as if furious he'd stolen its prey. Talon mounted his Mustang with all 4 lives pressed against him. Snow stung his face, but he pushed onward uphill, toward the hidden cabin tucked between the pines. "You don't leave this mountain tonight," he murmured to the woman and her daughters. "Not while I still breathe." With that vow echoing in the storm, he rode into the blinding white, carrying the faint flicker of 4 fading heartbeats toward safety. By the time native man Talon reached the hidden rise where his cabin sat tucked between ancient pines, the storm had turned vicious. Snow whipped sideways, erasing the trail behind him. Even his Mustang snorted nervously, nostrils frosted white. But the cabin was there, a dark silhouette against the swirling white. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. He'd left at dawn, long before the storm swallowed the mountain. He guided the horse to the small overhang, swung down, and lifted the woman into his arms again. She weighed almost nothing, her head lolling against his chest. Her skin was cold enough to burn. Inside, the cabin greeted them with stillness. 4 wooden walls, a heavy hearthstone, a rough-hewn table, and shelves carved by Talon's own hands years ago. No warmth, no fire. Yet it felt safer than the world they'd fled. He lowered the mother into the bedding near the hearth-thick hides layered with wool blankets. She murmured something in her sleep, a sound too soft to understand. Her nightdress clung to her skin with ice, her hair stiff with frost. Talon set the babies beside her, each in a nest of soft pelts he kept for winter traps. Their tiny breaths fluttered weakly, too fragile for the storm that still howled outside. He moved fast. First, the fire. He knelt by the hearth and stacked pine kindling with practiced hands. Flint struck. Sparks caught. A small flame licked up the wood. Soon warmth began pushing the cold into the corners of the room, chasing the frost from the air. Next, warmth for the babies. He removed his coat heavy, lined with fur, and laid it over the 3 infants, tucking it around their tiny bodies until only their eyes peeked out. The smallest one squirmed, releasing a tiny sound that hit him straight in the chest. "You're fighters," he said softly. He rose, grabbed the clay pot near the pantry, and filled it with goat's milk saved from the morning. It rested on the firestone until steam curled from the rim. As it warmed, he returned to the woman. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks bruised in deep shades of violet and blue. Whoever had beaten her did so with cruelty and intention. Yet there beneath it all her face held something soft. Something that had survived. He took a cloth, dipped it in warmed water, and gently cleaned the cuts along her arms and wrists. Dried blood lifted in slow streaks. Her breathing steadied little by little. "You'll live," he whispered, more to himself than her. The milk began to bubble faintly. Talon poured a small amount into a carved wooden spoon something his grandmother had made long ago and brought it to the smallest baby's lips. She latched clumsily at first, then hungrily, tiny hands curling with new strength. One by one, he fed each child until their cries softened and their chests rose steady with sleep. When he finally sat back on his heels, the fire dancing warm shadows on the walls, he felt the storm lose some of its bite outside, as if it too had quieted to listen. The woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling like leaves. Her voice was a breath, barely audible. "Who are you?" Talon leaned forward, his dark braid falling over his shoulder. His voice stayed low, calm, grounding. "Someone who found you. Someone who won't let harm touch you again." Her gaze flickered to the 3 tiny bundles beside her. One of them sneezed softly. Tears filled her eyes, not loud, not desperate, just quiet and overwhelmed. "My daughters." "They're safe," he said, and he meant every word. And for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, the woman let herself close her eyes not in fear, but in trust. The storm eased by morning, leaving a heavy stillness pressed against the cabin walls. Native man Talon slept little, keeping watch from a stool near the fire. Every time one of the infants whimpered or the woman shifted, he stirred. When dawn finally brushed the frost off the windows, he checked the babies first. All 3 slept curled together beneath his fur coat, cheeks pink again, their breaths deeper than the night before. Good signs, strong signs. The woman woke next. A soft gasp left her as she tried to sit, pain flaring through her ribs. Talon stepped to her side instantly, one hand hovering to help without forcing. "Easy," he said. "You're safe here." She blinked up at him, confusion and memory colliding behind her eyes. Her voice shook. Where are we?" "My cabin on the North Ridge," he answered. "The storm couldn't take you." "Not while I was out there." She swallowed hard, the bruises on her throat coloring darker when she moved. "My girls?" Talon gestured to the fur-lined cradle he'd made from a basket and old pelts. The 3 newborns slept as if they had never known cold. "They're warm, fed, stronger than last night." The woman sagged with relief, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. She brushed a trembling fingertip across each tiny forehead. He watched her quietly, respectfully, giving space to her grief and gratitude. After a moment, she turned her head to him again. "My name is Lena Hawthorne." Talon nodded once. "Talon." Their eyes held for a beat of fragile connection formed in the flickering firelight. Lena tried to speak again but coughed, wincing as the movement tugged at her bruised ribs. Talon immediately poured water from a heated tin cup and held it for her. She drank in small sips, each one easing the rasp in her throat. When she finished, she stared into the flames, voice a whisper. "I thought we were going to die out there." "You didn't," Talon said simply. "Not on my land." Something in his tone steady, grounded made her breathe easier. He went to the stove and ladled warm broth into a wooden bowl. He handed it to her carefully, watching her strength return with each spoonful. Outside, the snow soft on the roof, sliding off in thick sheets. Inside, warmth grew inch by inch. Once she ate, the babies began to stir. Tiny sounds, needy and soft. Talon crouched beside their basket, loosening the coat to free their little arms. One of them waved a fist in the air, face scrunching. Lena smiled weakly. "That one is Uni. She's always been the stubborn one." Talon raised an eyebrow. "And the others?" Lena hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "May and little Alora." Talon repeated the name softly, his voice a gentle rumble. Uni, May, Alora. The names warmed the room more than the fire did. He fed each child carefully, spooning warm milk into their tiny mouths. Lena watched him with a look he didn't see, something like wonder mixed with disbelief. "You've done more for us in one night," she murmured, "than anyone ever has in my whole life." Talon didn't answer at first. He adjusted Alora's blanket, smoothing it over her tiny chest. Then he met Lena's eyes. No one deserves to be left in the snow. His voice dropped lower. Especially not a mother, and especially not her daughters. A silence followed, not empty, but full. Full of everything she couldn't yet say, and everything he wasn't ready to ask. Outside, the mountain held its breath. Inside, something fragile and new began to wake. By late afternoon, a gentle hush settled over the ridge. The storm had passed, leaving the world draped in soft white. Sunlight spilled through the frosted windows, warm and golden, catching in the strands of Lena's hair where they had thawed and dried. Native man Talon used the quiet hours to check the traps along the tree line, returning with enough game to last them a few days. When he stepped back inside, brushing snow off his shoulders, the fire was glowing low and steady. Lena sat propped against folded blankets, her babies tucked close, all three nestled around her like tiny sleeping chicks. Something in the scene made him pause at the doorway, not intruding, just observing. The warmth, the soft rise and fall of their breathing, the faint hum Lena murmured under her breath. It was the kind of peace he hadn't seen inside these walls in years. She looked up as he shut the door. "You were gone a while." "Storm buried the snares deeper than I expected," he replied, setting the rabbits and birds on the table. "Snow's heavy. Tracks don't stay long." Lena nodded, though her eyes drifted lower, toward the sling on his shoulder, where a thin scratch bled faintly through his shirt. "You're hurt." Talon glanced down as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing. It's not nothing," she said softly. "You saved us." "Let me help." There was a quiet insistence in her tone, gentle but firm. He hesitated, then sank onto the stool beside the hearth. Lena reached for the water basin, her movements slow and stiff but determined. She dipped a cloth, wrung it out, and pressed it lightly to the scratch. The cabin seemed to narrow around them, the air thick with the unspoken. "You're steady," she whispered, half to herself. "You're strong," he replied just as quietly. Lena blinked, surprised. But the way he said it simply, without expectation, settled something deep inside her. When she finished tending the small wound, Talon set aside the cloth. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly. The babies slept. Snow tapped against the window in a lazy rhythm. Then Lena spoke. "Talon, may I tell you the truth?" He nodded. She took a breath that trembled on its way out. "I was married, to a man with more land than kindness. More fists than mercy." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "The first daughter," he said, "was a mistake. The second, an embarrassment. The third—" Her gaze fell to the babies. "He called her a curse." Talon's jaw tightened, the shadows sharpening along his cheek. "But he said nothing, letting her speak her way through the pain. When Uni was born, he and his brothers dragged us outside. Said the land could take me if it wanted me. Said if the girls cried loud enough, someone might pick them up." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But no one came." "Someone did," Talon said. Lena looked up. He held her gaze steady, grounding, unflinching. "And that someone isn't leaving." Her breath broke silently, relief and disbelief tangled together. "Why?" she whispered. His answer came without hesitation. "Because no mother should suffer for giving life. And no child should pay for another man's cruelty." Outside, wind brushed the pines like a sigh. Inside, a new promise took root, quiet, but strong enough to weather any winter. Days passed, each one softer than the last. The snow thinned on the ridge, drops of meltwater trailing down the cabin roof. Inside, warmth settled into every corner. Lena's soft humming, the baby's tiny coos, the constant heartbeat of the fire. Talon found himself listening for those sounds every time he returned from the forest. His cabin, once silent as stone, now breathed with life. May opened her eyes more often. Uni kicked with surprising strength. Little Alora gripped Talon's finger one morning and refused to let go. Lena laughed, quiet, startled, beautiful. He hadn't heard laughter in years. But peace is fragile in places where cruelty rides on horseback. One morning, just after sunrise, the ridge grew too quiet. No bird call. No rustle of deer. Only a strange pressure in the air, heavy, expectant. Talon stepped outside, scanning the tree line. The cold wind tugged at the end of his braid. His instincts, honed by years in the wild, whispered danger before he even saw it. Tracks. Fresh. Multiple pairs. Heavy horses, not mountain ponies. They headed up the ridge trail, the one that eventually curled toward his cabin. Native man Talon dropped to one knee, brushing snow away with a gloved hand. The hoof prints were too deep for traders. Too many for hunters, and the spacing. Riding hard, he murmured. When he re-entered the cabin, Lena immediately sensed something had shifted. She sat upright, clutching May close. "What is it?" she whispered. Talon didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, checked the window, then the door latch. His movements were controlled calm, but edged with readiness. "Men on the trail," he said finally. 4, maybe 5. Didn't try to hide their approach. Lena's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around her child. "It's him. He sent them." Talon didn't have to ask who him meant. Cruel men always left the same kind of tracks. He crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze. "Listen to me. If they reach this cabin, they won't walk in on you helpless. Not again." Lena's eyes shimmered with fear and trust. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Talon said. He moved quickly, but nothing in his touch was hurried as he helped secure the girls in their cradle. He packed dried roots, smoked meat, a waterskin enough to keep them alive if they needed to disappear into the forest. Then he reached under his bed and pulled out a wrapped bundle. Inside lay a bow carved from mountain yew, its grip polished by years of use. Beside it, a quiver of arrows fletched with hawk feathers. Lena stared. "You're going to fight them?" "If I must." He slung the quiver across his back. "But I would rather outthink them." He stepped outside once more, scanning the ridge. The wind carried distant hooves, faint but closing. He turned back to Lena, voice low but steady. "If they come to take what's yours, I stand between them and you." She pressed a trembling hand to her heart. "Why would you risk your life for us?" Talon didn't hesitate. "Because some people deserve to be chosen," he said quietly. "And no one ever chose you." A tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, but from a warmth she didn't know how to hold. Outside, the thunder of hooves grew closer. Inside, Talon Rivers prepared to face the storm that walked on 2 legs. The hoofbeats grew louder, slow at first, then pounding steadily through the trees. The cabin walls, once a shelter, now felt too thin, too fragile. Lena clutched her daughters to her chest, her breath rapid and shallow. Native man Talon stood near the doorway, shoulders squared, every muscle held in a quiet readiness. He looked carved from the mountain itself, steady, unmoving, unshakable. "Talon," Lena whispered. "If it's them, if it's his brothers." "It is," he said calmly. The simplicity of his answer made her blood run cold. He stepped toward the back wall of the cabin and pressed his palm against a hidden wooden panel. It clicked open, revealing a narrow, hollow space behind stacked crates. "Just big enough for a mother and 3 tiny daughters?" Lena's eyes widened. "You built this?" "Long ago," he said. "For emergencies." "Not like this, but it will do." She hesitated. Her voice trembled. "You want us to hide?" "I need you to," Talon corrected gently. "Your daughters cannot see this. And your husband's men won't harm what they can't find." Lena's chest tightened. She looked at May, Uni, and Alora, so small, so innocent, and silently stepped into the hidden alcove. Talon layered furs around them to keep them warm. The babies stirred but did not cry. Before closing the panel, he met Lena's eyes. "You're safe," he whispered. "No matter what happens out there." Her lips trembled. "Don't let them hurt you." He didn't answer, but he placed a hand briefly over hers, grounding her with a warmth that ran deeper than touch. Then the panel closed. A sharp knock slammed against the door. Talon stepped forward, spine straight, jaw set. He opened it slowly, deliberately. 5 men sat on horseback outside the cabin. Their coats were thick, faces rough, breath steaming in the cold. And Talon recognized cruelty even before they spoke. One man dismounted. Broad shoulders, a scar across his cheek, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You the mountain tracker folks talk about?" the man asked. Talon didn't move. "Depends who's asking. We're looking for a woman," the man continued, "and 3 newborn girls. Stupid thing ran from her husband. We're here to bring her home." Talon leaned against the doorway, arms crossing calmly. "You lost them somewhere?" The scarred man sneered. "Don't play smart. Tracks led up this ridge. She can't survive long on her own. If she came by here, you'd have seen something." Talon's voice stayed low, even, controlled. "Snow erases things quickly. Not everything." Another man muttered, motioning to the ground where faint tracks of Talon's horse showed. "Maybe we should look inside." Talon's eyes hardened. "No." The scarred man smirked. "Not your choice, friend. He stepped forward, but Talon shifted subtly, blocking the doorway completely. "You want to enter my home?" Talon asked quietly. "You walk over me!" The air froze. The men exchanged wary glances. The scarred man tilted his head. "I've heard stories about you, Ridgeman. That you're quick with a bow. That you don't miss." Talon didn't blink. "You heard right." A tense silence hung between them, thick as the snow-laden branches above. Then the scarred man laughed. "Move aside. Or we finish this the hard way." Talon's hand dropped slowly toward the bow slung across his back. "There's only one way this ends," he said softly, "and it's not with innocent blood on my floor." Hoofbeats paused. Breaths held. The mountain seemed to wait, watching. And danger, at last, stepped fully through the trees. The air outside the cabin thick and sharp cold, waiting. 5 armed men. One man standing between them and the hidden alcove protecting a mother and her 3 newborn daughters. Native man Talon didn't flinch. The scar-cheeked man stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "You've got guts, Ridge boy." "I'll give you that." His gaze slid past Talon toward the cabin interior. "But guts won't save you if you're hiding what's ours." Talon's eyes darkened. "She doesn't belong to you." The other men exchanged looks, irritation, confusion, anger bubbling beneath their worn coats. Lena, listening from behind the panel, pressed her hand to her lips to keep from crying out. She could hear every word, every threat, every heartbeat. Inside the hidden alcove, the babies stirred. May whined softly, reaching for her mother's warmth. Lena stroked her tiny back, whispering a prayer into the darkness. Outside, the standoff sharpened. The scarred man's smirk twisted. "So you do know where she is." Talon straightened, the wind tugging at the loose end of his braid. "I know she left hell behind her. I'm not sending her back." One of the men spat into the snow. "This isn't your fight." Talon's jaw tightened. "It became my fight the moment I found a woman freezing to death with 3 newborns at her feet." The scarred man's smile vanished. "Search the cabin," he ordered. 2 of the men dismounted. But Talon was already moving. In one swift motion, he stepped off the porch and the bow was in his hand before the men even registered the shift. The string hummed as he drew back, arrow locked, his stance steady as bedrock. "Take one more step," Talon warned, voice low and unshakable, "and this ridge becomes your grave." The men froze. They believed him. Every story they'd heard about the mountain tracker suddenly felt real. The scar-cheeked man raised his hands in a mock surrender. "Easy, no need for blood. We just want the woman. She ain't worth dying for." At those words, something inside Talon snapped, not with rage, but with a cold certainty. "She's worth protecting," he said. "And the children?" "More than you'll ever be." The scarred man's expression darkened. "Move aside." "No," Talon fired. The arrow struck the snow inches from the lead man's boot-warning shot, flawless and controlled. The man jolted back, face draining of color. "You've got 2 choices," Talon said, drawing another arrow. "Turn around and ride back the way you came. Or leave this mountain carried." The threat hung in the air like a blade. The men hesitated, fear creeping into their faces. They were used to beating the weak, cornering the helpless, not standing toe-to-toe with someone who had nothing left to fear. But the scarred man wasn't done. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a hiss. "She belongs to her husband. The law says so." Talon's voice was quieter still, but far more dangerous. "Then the law is wrong." Wind swept between them, carrying the weight of that truth. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "You protect her now. You make yourself our enemy." Talon held his bow steady, unblinking. "Well, I've been an enemy to worse men than you." Silence. Long, heavy. Finally, the scarred man clicked his tongue. "Mount up," he barked to his men. "We'll be back. With more men. With the law." As they turned their horses, he gave Talon one last look, a promise of violence still coming. The hoofbeats faded into the trees. Only then did Talon lower his bow. Inside the hidden alcove, Lena's silent sob broke free. Not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization someone finally stood for her. Someone finally chose her. A single tear slid down her cheek as she whispered into the darkness. "Talon, why would you fight the world for us?" But the answer waited on the other side of the wall, where Talon breathed out slowly, preparing for the battle he knew wasn't over yet. When the hoofbeats faded completely, silence poured over the ridge like warm water, filling every crack left by fear. Native man Talon remained outside a moment longer, scanning the tree line, bow still in hand. Snowflakes drifted around him, settling on his shoulders and braid, but he barely felt the cold. Only when he was certain the men were gone did he step back into the cabin. He closed the door quietly, not slamming it, not sighing in relief, just steady, controlled, as if he didn't want the hidden alcove to feel 1 ounce of fear more than necessary. Talon pressed his palm to the wooden panel. "It's safe," he said quietly. The latch clicked, and the panel opened. Lena sat in the narrow space, her daughters clutched to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. She exhaled a shaky breath the moment she saw him, like her lungs had been tied tight for too long. He knelt, lifting May first, then Uni, then tiny Alora, placing each into the warm cradle by the hearth. Lena crawled out last, her legs trembling as they touched the floor. Talon reached out instinctively and steadied her. Her fingers grasped his forearm, tight at first fearful, then slowly softening. "You're safe," he repeated. Lena's voice broke. "You stood in front of them." "Alone. I wasn't alone," he said, glancing at the cradle. "I had something worth protecting." Her throat tightened. She sank onto the nearest chair, covering her face with both hands as the weight of everything, fear, survival, disbelief, gratitude, came crashing down all at once. Talon set another log on the fire, giving her space without leaving her alone. When the flames rose higher, painting the room in gold, he pulled a blanket from the bed and draped it gently around her shoulders. Lena flinched at the touch, old reflexes bruised into her bones. But then she looked up at him and didn't flinch again. "You don't owe us anything," she whispered. Talon sat across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes steady on hers. "I don't protect people because I owe them," he said calmly. "I protect them because it's right." Lena's lips trembled. "My husband's men, they'll come back. They said they would bring more." "I know. And the law, he'll twist it. He always has." "I know." She swallowed hard. "Then why aren't you scared?" Talon leaned back slightly, braids sliding over his shoulder, his expression soft but unyielding. "Because fear doesn't guide me," he murmured. "Choice does." Lena blinked, confused. "Choice?" "I choose to stand between you and any harm. I choose to keep your daughters safe. I choose to believe no man has the right to break someone the way he broke you." Her breath hitched. A fresh tear slipped down her cheek, not from terror, but from something far more fragile. "No one's ever chosen me," she whispered. "Then I'll be the first." His voice was barely above the crackle of the fire, gentle, but carrying a strength deeper than the mountains themselves. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, with the firelight casting gold along his jaw, warmth in his eyes, and a certainty she had never seen in another human being. Her handshaking reached out. Talon didn't move, didn't rush. He simply let her choose. And she did. Her fingertips brushed his, small, tentative, trusting. And in that quiet moment, something inside her cracked open, not pain this time, but hope, real, living hope. The kind that grows roots, the kind that changes fates, the kind that doesn't let go. The next morning, dawn arrived pale and quiet, painting the mountain ridges in soft pink and gold. Native man Talon was already outside, checking traps and mending the fence, braids swinging over his shoulder, leather trousers dusted with snow that had lingered from the night's storm. Every movement was deliberate, calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made even the wind pause. Inside, Lena stirred her daughters from sleep, moving like a shadow through the cabin, careful not to wake them too quickly. May yawned, Uni rubbed her eyes, and little Alora nestled against Lena's chest, soft warmth against the cold morning. Talon stepped back inside, brushing snow from his coat. He didn't speak immediately, just watched Lena move. She noticed him, and for the first time didn't flinch at his presence. Instead, she offered a faint, tentative smile. "I found some wild onions near the creek," he said quietly, breaking the silence, "and there's a patch of mushrooms beyond the ridge." "Enough for breakfast." Lena nodded, a sense of calm settling over her like the first rays of the sun. "I'll cook," she whispered. The morning passed slowly, intentionally. Talon sat near the window, repairing the leather straps of his bow, while Lena prepared a simple meal. Their daughters played near the hearth, giggling, stacking small logs, building imaginary fortresses that no one could invade. It was the first time in months the cabin felt more like a home and less like a fortress. Then came the wind. Sharp, urgent, carrying the scent of approaching trouble. Talon's head snapped up. Instincts honed over years in the mountains had him listening, every muscle taut. Lena noticed immediately, the shadows in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. "They're coming," he said simply. Lena froze, clutching Alora to her chest. But Talon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his bow, knocked an arrow, and moved toward the door. "You and the girls head for the creek. Stay low, do not stop, do not look back." "Only come back when it's safe." Her voice trembled. "What about you?" "I'll draw them away," he replied, calm, steady, unflinching. Like always. And before she could protest, he had slipped out the back, disappearing into the trees like smoke in the wind. Lena gathered the girls, bundling them under thick blankets, moving silently through the snow. Every step was careful, every heartbeat loud in her chest. She didn't look back, but she could feel him behind her in spirit, a shadow guarding her every step. From the ridge, Talon could see them, the men returning, faces twisted with anger and entitlement, boots crunching in the snow. He dropped low behind a fallen pine, drawing his bow and letting the wind carry his presence away from the trail Lena had taken. Each movement was precise, practiced, intentional. Every arrow loosed was a promise. They will not touch her. Not her. Not the girls. By the time Lena reached the creek, snow matted in her hair, cheeks stinging from the cold, she finally allowed herself a breath. The girls huddled close, unaware of how close danger had been. And as she looked up, a faint trace of hope broke across her face, the hope that some men, some hearts, truly could stand in the gap between violence and survival. For Talon, the fight wasn't over, but he did in them something more precious than life, a chance to live freely, to laugh, to dream, to hope. And for Lena, that chance wasn't just survival, it was the start of something she had thought lost forever, trust and maybe love. The snow had melted entirely from the ridges now, leaving the mountains alive with the first tender shoots of spring. Birds chirped in the pines, and the creek bubbled with a new energy, carrying the chill of melted snow down the valley. Lena and the girls emerged cautiously from their hiding spot, breath visible in the crisp morning air. Native man Talon appeared first at the edge of the trees, braids swinging, leather trousers dusted with frost. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, watching Lena and the children with a quiet intensity. As he approached, Lena's chest rose and fell with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had kept his word. He had protected them. "Is it safe?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "For you and the girls, yes," he said, scanning the horizon. His eyes, dark and unyielding, softened as they fell on the three little faces peeking from behind blankets. "For me, there's always work to do." They returned to the cabin, where the fire had died down to embers. Talon knelt to stoke it back to life while Lena and the girls settled inside, the weight of fear slowly lifting. The cabin, once a refuge, was now a home filled with the promise of laughter, warmth, and safety. Days turned into weeks. Talon hunted, trapped, and tended to the cabin and its surrounding land, always returning with enough for all. Lena tended the hearth and the children, teaching them letters, songs, and stories. Slowly, the cabin became more than a place to survive, it became a place to live. One evening, Lena watched Talon repairing a wooden cradle he had whittled himself. The girls, tired from the day's play, sat quietly around him. His hands were steady, careful, and she saw in every movement the same dedication he had shown when he carried them to safety months ago. He glanced at her without speaking, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For Lena, it was enough. No words were needed. Trust, love, and gratitude had been carved into the walls of the cabin, just like the names of her daughters. Spring fully returned. Wildflowers carpeted the mountainside. The girls laughed as they chased each other through the yard, their skirts stained with green and gold. Lena baked bread, stirred stew, and taught lessons to the children of travelers passing along the switchback trail. Talon's presence remained quiet but unwavering, always ready, always protective. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Lena stepped onto the porch and found Talon sitting on the steps, sanding a long plank of cedar. The warmth of the day lingered on the air, and the smell of pine and smoke mingled around them. Lena carried 2 mugs of tea and sat beside him, letting her hand brush against his. "They survived," she whispered. "Yes," he replied, eyes on the horizon. Then he looked at her, really looked, the weight of the past months reflected in his gaze. And so did we. The girls tumbled past them, giggling, and Talon finally let a laugh escape low, rich, and free. Lena rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had once been only a protector but had now become a partner. At Granger Ridge, the hearth burned bright, the wind was gentle, and the mountains stood witness to a love forged in snow, blood, and courage. Together, they had built more than a home. They had built a life of warmth, of trust, and of joy. The storm was gone. The past had been survived. And in the quiet golden light of spring, Lena, Talon, and the girls finally knew what it meant to be truly safe, truly loved, and truly home.